Italy's story begins long before it was called Italy, deep in the ancient Mediterranean world where tribes, cultures, and empires constantly rose and fell. The Italian peninsula, shaped like a long boot stretching into the Mediterranean Sea, was home to some of the earliest complex civilizations in Europe. Its mountains, fertile plains, and strategic coastal position made it both a cradle of culture and a battleground of competing powers. In the earliest known periods, Italy was not a unified land but a patchwork of peoples. Among them were the Latins, Samnites, Umbrians, and Etruscans. Each group had its own language, customs, and political systems. The most influential of these early civilizations was the Etruscans, who flourished in central Italy long before Rome became powerful. They built advanced cities, developed engineering techniques, and influenced Roman religion, architecture, and political symbols. Many Roman traditions, including the use of the arch and gladiatorial games, can trace their roots back to Etruscan culture. Meanwhile, in southern Italy and Sicily, Greek settlers established colonies as part of what historians call Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece. Cities like Syracuse, Taranto, and Naples became centers of philosophy, trade, and art. These Greek colonies introduced Italy to advanced ideas in governance, science, and architecture, blending Mediterranean cultures in ways that would shape the future of Western civilization. It was in this diverse and competitive environment that a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River began to rise. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, who, after a conflict with his twin brother Remus, became the city's first king. While this story is mythological, it reflects a deeper truth. Rome began as a modest village but quickly expanded due to its strategic location and military organization. Early Rome was ruled by kings, many of whom were influenced by Etruscan traditions. However, in 509 BCE, the Romans overthrew their last king and established a republic. This marked one of the most important turning points in Italian, and indeed world, history. The Roman Republic introduced a new system of governance where power was shared between elected officials, the Senate, and popular assemblies. Although not fully democratic by modern standards, it was a revolutionary political experiment for its time. As the Republic grew, Rome began expanding across the Italian peninsula. Through a combination of military conquest, alliances, and strategic diplomacy, Rome gradually brought the surrounding tribes and cities under its control. The Latin War, Samnite Wars, and conflicts with the Etruscans all contributed to Rome's dominance in central and southern Italy. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had unified most of the peninsula under its authority. This unification was not just military, it was also cultural and administrative. Rome introduced roads, legal systems, and citizenship rights that helped bind its territories together. The famous Roman roads, such as the Via Appia, allowed armies, merchants, and ideas to travel quickly across the peninsula. Latin, the language of Rome, slowly spread and replaced many local languages, laying the foundation for modern Italian. However, Rome's ambitions did not stop at Italy. After securing the peninsula, it turned its attention to the wider Mediterranean world. The Punic Wars against Carthage, especially the long and brutal Second Punic War led by Hannibal, tested Rome's resilience. Despite devastating losses, Rome ultimately emerged victorious, becoming the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. As Rome expanded further, it absorbed Greece, Egypt, Spain, and parts of the Middle East. The Roman Republic transformed into a vast imperial system, but this expansion also created internal tensions. Wealth inequality grew, political corruption spread, and military generals gained increasing influence over politics. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was in crisis. Civil wars erupted between rival leaders such as Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River in 49 BCE marked the beginning of a civil war that would end the Republic. Caesar's eventual victory and assassination in 44 BCE led to further instability, but also paved the way for a new political order. In 27 BCE, Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, later known as Augustus, became the first Roman emperor. This marked the birth of the Roman Empire, one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in human history. Under Augustus, Italy became the heart of a vast imperial system stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Rome entered a golden age known as the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability lasting about 2 centuries. During this time, Italy became the center of art, architecture, law, and culture. Cities flourished, trade expanded, and monumental structures such as the Colosseum, aqueducts, and temples were built. Roman law became the foundation of many modern legal systems, and Latin literature produced great writers like Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero. Despite its greatness, the empire slowly began to weaken. Overexpansion, economic difficulties, and pressure from external invasions strained its stability. Germanic tribes such as the Visigoths and Vandals began attacking Roman territories. Internal corruption and political instability further weakened the empire's structure. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. This event is often marked as the end of ancient Rome and the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe. Italy, once the center of a vast empire, fragmented into smaller kingdoms and territories controlled by various barbarian rulers. However, Roman culture did not disappear. Instead, it transformed and survived through the Byzantine Empire in the east, the Catholic Church, and the continued use of Latin. Italy remained a culturally significant region, even if politically divided. The fall of Rome marked the end of ancient Italy's unified power but also set the stage for a new era. Over the coming centuries, Italy would become a patchwork of city-states, kingdoms, and religious territories, each shaping the medieval world in different ways. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, the Italian peninsula entered one of the most unstable and transformative periods in its history. The collapse of centralized Roman authority did not simply end a government, it dismantled a civilization that had unified law, infrastructure, language, and identity across centuries. What followed was not a single successor state, but a fractured landscape where foreign rulers, local powers, and the church competed for control. The first major shift came with the arrival of Germanic kingdoms. Among them, the Ostrogoths under Theodoric the Great established a kingdom in Italy in the late 5th century. Theodoric attempted to preserve Roman traditions while ruling as a Germanic king. Roman administration, architecture, and legal systems were partially maintained, and for a time, Italy experienced a fragile balance between old Roman structures and new barbarian leadership. However, this stability did not last. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Rome based in Constantinople, launched a campaign to reconquer Italy. Emperor Justinian I sought to restore Roman unity under Eastern Roman rule. His generals, especially Belisarius and later Narses, waged the devastating Gothic Wars, 535 to 554 CE. These wars were brutal and long, ravaging cities, destroying farmland, and severely weakening Italy's population and economy. Although the Byzantines succeeded in reclaiming much of Italy, their control was short-lived and fragile. The peninsula was left exhausted and vulnerable. Into this weakened land arrived a new wave of invaders, the Lombards. In 568 CE, the Lombards, a Germanic people, invaded northern Italy and established the Lombard kingdom. Unlike earlier rulers, they did not attempt to preserve Roman unity. Instead, they divided Italy into a patchwork of duchies and territories. Their control extended across much of the north and central regions, while the Byzantines retained parts of the south and coastal cities such as Ravenna and Naples. This division marked a crucial turning point in Italian history. Italy was no longer a unified political entity but a fragmented mosaic of competing powers. Over time, this fragmentation became a defining feature of the peninsula's identity. Amid this political chaos, a new and powerful institution was rising, the Catholic Church. As imperial authority weakened, the Church in Rome became not only a spiritual force but also a political one. The Pope gradually emerged as a central authority figure, especially in central Italy. The Church provided stability, education, and continuity with Rome's ancient legacy. The papacy also began to play a diplomatic role between rival powers. Popes negotiated with Lombard kings, Byzantine rulers, and later Frankish emperors. This positioned the Church as a unifying force in a divided land, even though it did not rule Italy directly as a single state. By the 8th century, a new political alliance changed Italy once again. The Lombards expanded their influence, threatening the independence of the Papal States. In response, the Pope sought help from the Franks, a powerful kingdom north of the Alps. This alliance led to one of the most significant transformations in medieval Europe. In 774 CE, Charlemagne, king of the Franks, invaded Italy and defeated the Lombard kingdom. He was crowned King of the Lombards and later, in 800 CE, crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in Rome. This event symbolically revived the idea of a Western Roman Empire, now transformed into what historians call the Holy Roman Empire. Although the empire claimed Roman heritage, Italy itself remained politically fragmented. Charlemagne's successors struggled to maintain control, and authority in Italy gradually weakened again. Local nobles, bishops, and city leaders began asserting independence, especially in northern and central regions. During the early Middle Ages, Italy became a land of competing authorities: the Papal States in central Italy, Byzantine territories in the south, Lombard duchies, and increasingly autonomous cities. This fragmentation, while chaotic, also allowed unique local cultures and institutions to develop. One of the most important developments of this period was the rise of monasteries. Benedictine monasteries, founded under the rule of Saint Benedict, became centers of learning, agriculture, and manuscript preservation. In a time often described as the Dark Ages, these institutions preserved Roman knowledge, copied ancient texts, and maintained literacy across Europe. Meanwhile, southern Italy experienced a different trajectory. The Byzantines maintained influence in regions like Apulia and Calabria, while later Arab forces briefly controlled parts of Sicily. This created a cultural blend unlike anywhere else in Europe, combining Latin, Greek, and Islamic influences. By the 11th century, Italy began to experience economic revival. Trade routes expanded across the Mediterranean, connecting Italian ports with the Byzantine Empire, North Africa, and the Islamic world. Cities like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa began to grow in wealth and importance due to maritime commerce. These coastal cities developed into powerful maritime republics. Venice, in particular, became a dominant trading power, controlling routes between Europe and the East. Genoa rivaled Venice in maritime strength, while Pisa also emerged as a naval power. These city-states operated independently, governed by merchant elites rather than kings. Inland cities also began to assert independence. Florence, Milan, and others started developing self-governing communes. These communes represented early forms of civic governance, where citizens and guilds played a role in political decision-making. This was a major shift from feudal systems dominating much of medieval Europe. However, Italy was not unified. It remained a battleground of influence between the papacy, the Holy Roman Emperors, local nobles, and rising city-states. This tension often erupted into conflict, especially between supporters of imperial authority, Ghibellines, and supporters of the papacy, Guelphs. Despite political instability, Italy during the medieval period laid the foundation for one of the most remarkable cultural transformations in history. Its cities became centers of trade, finance, and intellectual exchange, setting the stage for a cultural rebirth that would soon reshape Europe. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the Italian peninsula had transformed into one of the most economically dynamic regions in Europe. The old medieval fragmentation did not disappear. Instead, it evolved into something new, powerful independent city-states. These cities were not kingdoms in the traditional sense, but self-governing republics, duchies, and merchant-led states that competed fiercely for trade, influence, and prestige. At the heart of this transformation was wealth generated through commerce. Italy's location between Western Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean made it a natural hub for trade. Goods from Asia, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic world flowed through Italian ports and markets. Spices, silk, precious metals, and luxury goods created enormous fortunes for merchant families and trading networks. Among the most powerful maritime republics was Venice. Built on a lagoon in the Adriatic Sea, Venice became a master of naval trade and diplomacy. Its fleet controlled key routes between Europe and the East, especially after the Crusades opened new connections to the Levant. Venetian merchants established trade agreements that brought enormous wealth into the city, funding grand architecture, public works, and artistic patronage. Another dominant maritime power was Genoa. Rivaling Venice, Genoa built its own trading empire across the Mediterranean and even into the Black Sea. The competition between Venice and Genoa was intense, leading to several naval wars that shaped Mediterranean politics for centuries. Pisa, though less dominant than the other two, also played a significant maritime role before declining after defeat by Genoa. Inland, the city of Florence emerged as a financial and cultural powerhouse. Unlike Venice and Genoa, Florence was not primarily a naval state but a center of banking and commerce. The Florentine banking families developed advanced financial systems, including credit, currency exchange, and international banking networks. The most famous among them, the Medici family, would later become one of the most influential dynasties in European history. These city-states operated with remarkable independence. Many were republics governed by councils, merchant guilds, or elected officials. Others were ruled by powerful families or local lords who maintained control through wealth and alliances. Despite their differences, all these cities shared one key trait, a strong sense of civic identity and competition with neighboring powers. This competitive environment had an unexpected consequence: it fueled cultural and intellectual growth. Wealthy patrons began investing heavily in art, architecture, and education. Churches, palaces, and public buildings became canvases for artistic innovation. This environment laid the foundation for one of the most important cultural movements in human history, the Renaissance. The Renaissance began in Italy in the 14th century and marked a rebirth of interest in classical antiquity, especially the art, philosophy, and literature of ancient Greece and Rome. Italian scholars rediscovered ancient texts, studied Latin and Greek manuscripts, and began to view human beings, rather than only religious doctrine, as central to intellectual life. This shift in thinking became known as humanism. Florence became the epicenter of this cultural explosion. Artists like Giotto began breaking away from medieval artistic traditions, introducing more realistic human figures and emotional expression. This transformation continued into the 15th century with masters such as Donatello, who revolutionized sculpture, and Brunelleschi, who developed groundbreaking architectural techniques, including the engineering of the massive dome of Florence Cathedral. The Medici family played a crucial role in this cultural flowering. As bankers and political leaders, they used their immense wealth to sponsor artists, philosophers, and scientists. Under their patronage, Florence became a laboratory of creativity where art, science, and politics intersected in unprecedented ways. At the same time, other Italian cities were also experiencing cultural growth. Venice became known for its painting schools and architectural beauty, while Milan developed as a center of engineering and military innovation. Rome, under the influence of the papacy, began to rebuild itself as a spiritual and artistic capital. The intellectual movement of humanism changed the way people thought about knowledge and the world. Scholars such as Petrarch are often called the father of humanism because he encouraged the study of classical texts and emphasized individual human potential. This shift gradually moved Europe away from purely religious explanations of life toward a more balanced view that included science, art, and philosophy. However, Italy was still politically unstable. The constant rivalry between city-states often led to wars, shifting alliances, and foreign interventions. Powerful external forces such as the Holy Roman Empire, France, and Spain frequently intervened in Italian affairs, hoping to exploit its wealth and divisions. Despite this instability, the cultural achievements of Italy during this period were extraordinary. The Renaissance spread from Florence to other cities and eventually across Europe. It marked the beginning of modern Western culture, influencing art, science, politics, and philosophy for centuries to come. By the late 15th century, Italy had become the cultural heart of Europe but remained politically fragmented. This combination of artistic brilliance and political division would set the stage for the next phase of its history, an era of foreign invasions, powerful empires, and shifting control over the peninsula. By the late 15th century, Italy had reached an extraordinary cultural peak, even as its political structure remained deeply fragmented. The city-states that had fueled the Renaissance were now at their height of artistic brilliance, but their rivalry and lack of unity made the peninsula increasingly vulnerable to foreign powers. This contradiction, cultural dominance and political weakness, would define Italy's fate for centuries. The period known as the High Renaissance, roughly spanning the late 1400s to the early 1500s, represents one of the most remarkable artistic eras in world history. Cities like Florence, Rome, and Venice became centers of unmatched creativity, producing artists whose works still define global standards of beauty and innovation. In Florence, the Renaissance reached its intellectual and artistic maturity. The city had already been transformed by earlier masters, but now it produced geniuses such as Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was not only a painter but also an inventor, scientist, and engineer. His works such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper combined scientific observation with emotional depth, redefining the possibilities of visual art. At the same time, Michelangelo Buonarroti rose to prominence. A sculptor, painter, and architect, Michelangelo created works of immense power and emotional intensity. His sculpture of David symbolized human strength and perfection, while his frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome became one of the most celebrated achievements in Western art. Another key figure was Raphael, whose paintings embodied harmony, balance, and classical beauty. Together, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael formed the triumvirate of high Renaissance masters, each contributing to a new vision of human potential and artistic expression. Venice also flourished during this time, developing a distinct artistic style characterized by rich color and atmospheric depth. Artists such as Titian elevated Venetian painting to new heights. Venice remained a major trading power, but increasingly its wealth was invested in culture, architecture, and art rather than territorial expansion. Rome, meanwhile, was undergoing a dramatic transformation under the authority of the papacy. Popes such as Julius II and Leo X became major patrons of Renaissance art and architecture. They commissioned grand projects to restore Rome as a spiritual and cultural capital of Christianity. The rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica and the decoration of the Vatican symbolized this revival. However, while Italy was experiencing this cultural golden age, its political fragmentation invited foreign intervention. The Italian Wars, beginning in 1494, marked a turning point in the peninsula's history. These conflicts were initiated when King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy, claiming the Kingdom of Naples. This invasion shattered the balance of power among Italian states. What followed was a series of prolonged wars involving France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and various Italian states. Italy became a battleground for European powers seeking control over its wealth, strategic position, and cultural influence. The once dominant city-states found themselves unable to resist larger centralized monarchies. One of the most significant outcomes of these wars was the rise of Spanish dominance in southern Italy. The Kingdom of Naples and Sicily gradually came under Spanish control, while Milan also fell under foreign influence. The Papal States remained independent but were often politically pressured by external powers. The sack of Rome in 1527 by imperial troops of Charles V was a particularly devastating event. It symbolized the end of the Renaissance's golden political stability and marked a psychological turning point for Italy. Rome, the heart of Christendom and Renaissance culture, was violently looted, and much of its population suffered greatly. Despite these political upheavals, Renaissance culture continued to spread. Artists, architects, and thinkers adapted to new circumstances, and Italian ideas influenced courts across Europe, including France, England, and Spain. The Renaissance was no longer confined to Italy, it had become a European phenomenon. However, Italy itself entered a period of decline in political autonomy. Foreign powers increasingly controlled different regions of the peninsula. Spain dominated the south and Milan, Austria later influenced northern territories, and France continued to intervene intermittently in Italian affairs. This fragmentation weakened Italy's ability to act as a unified power. Unlike France or Spain, which were consolidating into centralized nation-states, Italy remained divided into competing regions. This political weakness contrasted sharply with its continuing cultural influence. Even in this period of foreign dominance, Italian intellectual life did not disappear. Thinkers such as Niccolò Machiavelli emerged during this time of crisis. His work The Prince analyzed political power in a realistic and often harsh manner, reflecting the instability of Italian politics. Machiavelli's ideas would later influence modern political theory worldwide. By the mid-16th century, the Renaissance began to transition into the Baroque period, marked by more dramatic artistic styles and stronger religious themes. The Catholic Church, responding to the Protestant Reformation in Northern Europe, launched the Counter-Reformation, using art and architecture as tools of spiritual persuasion. Italy remained central to this cultural movement, especially through Rome's renewed architectural projects and the work of Baroque artists. However, politically, the peninsula was no longer a dominant force in European affairs. The High Renaissance thus represents both the pinnacle of Italian cultural achievement and the beginning of its political subordination to foreign empires. Italy's brilliance in art and thought continued, but its independence was increasingly limited. By the mid-16th century, Italy had entered a long era of foreign domination. The peninsula, once the heart of the Roman world and later the birthplace of the Renaissance, was now divided and controlled by external European powers. This period did not erase Italy's cultural importance, but it fundamentally changed its political destiny. After the Italian Wars, Spain became the dominant power in southern and much of central Italy. The Kingdom of Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia were effectively under Spanish control, while the Duchy of Milan in the north also fell within the Spanish sphere of influence. Spanish governors ruled these regions, collecting taxes and enforcing imperial policies that prioritized Spain's broader European ambitions. At the same time, the Papal States remained independent but were often caught between competing powers. The Pope still ruled central Italy as a spiritual and political leader, but his authority was increasingly shaped by the influence of France, Spain, and later Austria. Italy, as a whole, was no longer a unified political entity but a chessboard for European empires. By the early 18th century, the balance of power shifted again. After the War of the Spanish Succession, Austria gained control over much of northern Italy, including Milan and parts of the Veneto region. The Habsburg dynasty became a major political force in Italian affairs, continuing foreign dominance but also introducing administrative reforms in some areas. Despite this fragmentation, Italian society did not stagnate. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the spread of Enlightenment ideas across Europe, and Italy was no exception. Intellectuals began questioning traditional authority, including the power of monarchs and the church. New ideas about reason, science, individual rights, and governance slowly began to circulate among educated elites. Cities such as Milan and Naples became centers of reformist thinking. Writers, philosophers, and economists discussed modernization, legal reform, and economic development. While Italy did not experience an Enlightenment revolution on the scale of France, these ideas gradually influenced political thought across the peninsula. During this period, Italian culture continued to evolve. Baroque art and architecture flourished, especially in Rome, where the Catholic Church used dramatic artistic expression to reinforce its authority during the Counter-Reformation. Grand churches, sculptures, and paintings created a powerful visual language of religious devotion and emotional intensity. However, beneath this cultural richness, political fragmentation remained a persistent problem. Italy was still divided into multiple states: the Kingdom of Sardinia in the northwest, Austrian-controlled territories in the north, the Papal States in the center, and Spanish-influenced regions in the south. Each region had its own rulers, laws, and economic systems. In the late 18th century, a major external force once again reshaped Italy: the French Revolution. The revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, and nationalism spread rapidly across Europe. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power in France, he brought these ideas with him in the form of military conquest and political restructuring. Napoleon invaded Italy in the late 1790s, defeating Austrian forces and reorganizing the peninsula into several republics and kingdoms under French influence. He established the Italian Republic and later the Kingdom of Italy, with himself as ruler. For the first time in centuries, large parts of Italy were politically unified, even if under foreign control. Napoleon's rule introduced major reforms. Feudal structures were dismantled, legal systems were modernized, and administrative efficiency improved. The Napoleonic Code influenced Italian law, and ideas of nationalism began to spread more widely among the population. However, Napoleon's empire did not last. After his defeat in 1815, the Congress of Vienna restored the old order in Europe. Italy was once again divided into separate states, with Austria gaining even greater control over northern regions. The old fragmented system was reinstated, but something had changed permanently: the idea of Italian unity had been awakened. Throughout the early 19th century, nationalist movements began to grow across Italy. Intellectuals, revolutionaries, and secret societies such as the Carbonari began advocating for independence from foreign rule and the unification of Italy into a single nation-state. These movements were inspired by Enlightenment ideals and by the example of other national unifications in Europe. The Kingdom of Sardinia, ruled by the House of Savoy, emerged as a leading force in the push for unification. Under leaders such as King Charles Albert and later King Victor Emmanuel II, Sardinia became the political center of the Italian nationalist movement. At the same time, key figures such as Giuseppe Mazzini promoted the idea of a unified, democratic Italy. Mazzini founded Young Italy, a movement dedicated to creating a republic based on national unity and popular sovereignty. Meanwhile, Giuseppe Garibaldi became a military leader and revolutionary hero, known for his campaigns to liberate southern Italy. These movements often faced setbacks and failed uprisings, but the idea of unification continued to grow stronger. The revolutions of 1848, which swept across Europe, also reached Italy, although they were ultimately suppressed by Austrian and local forces. Still, they demonstrated the increasing strength of nationalist sentiment. By the mid-19th century, Italy stood on the edge of transformation. Foreign domination was still present, but the desire for unity had become unstoppable. Diplomatic efforts, military campaigns, and revolutionary movements were converging toward a single goal: the creation of a unified Italian nation. This sets the stage for the final phase of Italy's long historical journey, from a fragmented land under foreign control to a modern nation-state. By the mid-19th century, the idea of a unified Italian nation had grown from scattered intellectual dreams into a powerful political movement. After centuries of fragmentation, foreign rule, and regional division, Italy was moving toward a historic transformation known as the Risorgimento, the Resurgence. At this time, the Italian peninsula was still divided into multiple states. The north was influenced by the Austrian Empire, especially Lombardy and Venetia. The center remained under the control of the Papal States, while the south was ruled by the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. The Kingdom of Sardinia, led by the House of Savoy, stood out as the most progressive and strategically positioned Italian state, and it became the driving force of unification. The ideological foundation of the Risorgimento had already been laid by earlier thinkers like Giuseppe Mazzini, who envisioned a united, republican Italy based on liberty and democracy. His movement, Young Italy, inspired generations of revolutionaries. However, ideological unity alone was not enough. Military power and diplomacy were also required. That role was largely taken by the Kingdom of Sardinia and its chief minister, Count Camillo di Cavour. Cavour was a skilled statesman who believed in modernization, economic development, and strategic alliances. Unlike Mazzini, who wanted revolution, Cavour preferred diplomacy and calculated political maneuvering. Cavour formed an alliance with France under Emperor Napoleon III. This alliance led to war against Austria in 1859. The conflict, known as the Second Italian War of Independence, resulted in Sardinian French victories and the liberation of Lombardy from Austrian control. This was a crucial step toward unification. Meanwhile, in the south, another major figure emerged, Giuseppe Garibaldi. A charismatic military leader and nationalist hero, Garibaldi led a volunteer force known as the Red Shirts. In 1860, he launched the famous Expedition of the Thousand, sailing from northern Italy to Sicily. There, he successfully defeated the Bourbon Kingdom of the Two Sicilies and took control of southern Italy. Garibaldi then made a historic decision. Rather than establishing his own rule, he handed southern Italy over to King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia. This act unified much of the peninsula under a single monarchy. In 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was officially proclaimed, with Victor Emmanuel II as its first king. However, unification was not yet complete. Venice remained under Austrian control, and Rome was still governed by the Pope, supported by French troops. In 1866, Italy allied with Prussia in a war against Austria. As a result, Venice was annexed into the Kingdom of Italy. The final major step came in 1870, when French forces withdrew from Rome due to the Franco-Prussian War. Italian troops entered the city and took control, making Rome the capital of a fully unified Italy. The completion of unification marked a turning point in Italian history. For the first time since the fall of the Roman Empire, Italy existed as a single nation-state. However, unity did not immediately solve the country's deep regional differences. The industrialized north and the largely rural south developed at different rates, creating long-lasting economic and social divisions. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Italy began to industrialize. Cities like Milan, Turin, and Genoa became centers of manufacturing and industry. The country also pursued colonial ambitions in Africa, attempting to join other European powers in the scramble for Africa. However, Italy's colonial efforts met with mixed success and included conflicts in Eritrea, Somalia, and later Libya. During this period, Italy also experienced significant emigration. Millions of Italians left the country, particularly from the south, seeking better opportunities in the Americas and elsewhere. This mass migration reflected economic struggles and regional inequality within the newly unified nation. At the beginning of the 20th century, Italy entered a new phase marked by political instability and social change. In 1911, Italy celebrated the 50th anniversary of unification, but underlying tensions remained. When World War I broke out in 1914, Italy initially stayed neutral but later joined the Allied powers in 1915. Italy's participation in World War I brought significant human and economic losses. Although it was on the winning side, the post-war settlement left many Italians dissatisfied, feeling that the country had not received sufficient territorial gains. This sense of mutilated victory contributed to political unrest. In this unstable environment, Benito Mussolini rose to power. In 1922, Mussolini and his fascist party marched on Rome, leading to the establishment of a dictatorship. Under fascism, Italy became a totalitarian state, emphasizing nationalism, militarism, and authoritarian control. Mussolini aligned Italy with Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler during World War II. Italy initially participated in the war on the Axis side, but military defeats and internal resistance weakened the regime. By 1943, Mussolini was overthrown, and Italy switched sides to join the Allies. The end of World War II brought major change. In 1946, Italians voted in a referendum to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. The Kingdom of Italy ended, and the modern Italian Republic was born. A new constitution was adopted in 1948, establishing democratic institutions. In the decades that followed, Italy experienced rapid economic growth known as the Italian economic miracle. The country transformed from a largely agricultural society into an industrial and economic power. Cities expanded, infrastructure improved, and Italy became a founding member of the European Economic Community, the precursor to the European Union. Culturally, Italy remained influential in art, fashion, cinema, and design. Italian filmmakers such as Federico Fellini gained international recognition, while Italian fashion houses became global leaders. Rome, Milan, and Florence continued to symbolize Italy's blend of history and modern creativity. Despite economic progress, Italy also faced political challenges, including corruption scandals, organized crime in certain regions, and periods of governmental instability. Nevertheless, the country remained a stable democracy and an important member of international organizations such as NATO and the European Union. Today, modern Italy is a nation that embodies a unique historical journey. It carries the legacy of ancient Rome, the cultural brilliance of the Renaissance, the struggles of foreign domination, and the triumph of unification. Its identity is shaped by centuries of fragmentation and rebirth, making it one of the most historically layered countries in the world. From ancient tribes and imperial glory to Renaissance art and modern democracy, Italy's history is not a straight line but a powerful story of transformation, one of the most influential narratives in human civilization.